Have you ever ignored someone because you thought they were insignificant and then discovered they were a hero? On the most anticipated night of summer, as the Dallas sky filled with fireworks and flags fluttered from nearly every house, a mansion in Highland Park seemed to shine brighter than any star. Patriotic music mixed with the clinking of champagne glasses and the buzz of local elite guests. It was July 4th, a day of national pride, but also of ostentation for some. In the middle of the crowd, dressed in expensive clothes, a man walked slowly through the back of the house. He wore a faded military cap, a simple jacket with visible patches, and held a small box wrapped in blue paper. His eyes searched for someone, but found only turned faces. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody expected him. And at first glance, nobody cared. The host, an arrogant millionaire named Richard Holloway, cast a cold look at the stranger and turned his back. It seemed like just another uncomfortable interruption to his perfect evening, but what Richard didn't know was that this man had a story capable of changing everything. And before the last fireworks burst, the mask of indifference would begin to fall. Highland Park had always been synonymous with perfection. Tree-lined streets, houses with imposing facades, and lawns without a leaf out of place. But that night, Richard Holloway's house elevated this standard to a new level. 200 people had been invited. Investors, local politicians, energy sector businessmen, and even 2 reality show celebrities. Uniformed waiters glided between tables with trays of canapés and French champagne. A jazz group played live in the gazebo, while drones captured aerial images for the video that would be posted on the host's Instagram. Richard, a man in his 50s, with perfectly styled grey hair and a commanding presence, moved like a general among soldiers. He wore a white shirt, buttoned up to the neck, and a gold bracelet that gleamed every time he raised his glass. "Everything is just as I wanted," he told a business partner. "Patriotism with a touch of class." Everything followed the script, until a discreet murmur spread from the left side of the garden. An elderly man had entered. Nobody saw him coming. He appeared walking slowly, as if not wanting to disturb. His worn shoes contrasted with the white marble path. The military cap, aged and stained, bore the name of a unit, 101st Airborne Division. His jacket, olive green with small tears at the elbows, seemed to have been folded with care before leaving home. "Who let him in?" murmured a young woman to her boyfriend. "Maybe he's lost. He doesn't look like a guest." Frank Dawson, 74 years old, war veteran, retired, and, at that moment, invisible to almost everyone. Richard spotted him and approached with quick steps and a forced smile. The man's presence seemed like a threat to the luxurious visual of the party. "Good evening, can I help you?" he said, trying to maintain politeness. "Frank Dawson, your daughter invited me. She works with a veteran support group. I thought it was open." "Ah, yes. Emily. She loves those causes. Very noble of her. But this is more of an intimate celebration, you understand?" Frank smiled slightly, but there was something in his eyes. A glimmer of dignity, not resentment. "I understand. Don't want to cause trouble, just wanted to give this to her." He raised the wrapped box. It was a simple gift. Of course. But stay around here near the entrance, okay? Just for security. We have many important guests." Richard gave 2 dry pats on the old man's shoulder and walked away. His eyes swept the garden, making sure nobody was recording this. Frank turned silently and walked to a bench beside the flower bed. He sat down, adjusted the gift on his lap, and observed the guests laughing, toasting, dancing. He was there, but at the same time completely absent from the celebration. A few meters away, Emily Holloway observed everything. She was 17 years old, had brown hair tied in a messy bun, and wore a simple red dress, purposely contrasting with the glamour around her. She had an attentive, curious look and growing discomfort. She approached her mother, who was talking with two ladies from the riding club. "Mom, that gentleman over there, who is he?" "Oh, I don't even know. Your father was furious. Said he showed up out of nowhere with some story about veterans. I sent invitations, remember, to the veterans we help at the shelter. He must be one of them." "Emily, dear, that was more of a symbolic idea. Nobody expected them to actually come." Emily fell silent for a moment. Her eyes turned to the old man sitting alone, holding the gift as if carrying something sacred. While the party continued with its artificial brilliance, that man carried invisible scars in his body and a story that nobody there cared to hear. Yet. And she felt she needed to do something. The wooden bench where Frank sat seemed isolated from the rest of the party, like a silent island surrounded by a tide of loud voices, toasts, and flashing cell phones. The music rose. The fireworks had already begun, but he didn't react. He just watched. In his lap, the wrapped gift remained untouched. A small blue box, decorated with a white ribbon, simple but carefully folded. Anyone looking closely would notice that his hands, though strong, trembled slightly, but nobody looked closely, except Emily. She walked away from her mother's group without saying anything. She passed by the pool, by a couple taking selfies with the illuminated USA sign, and approached the bench. "Sir Dawson, right?" Frank raised his eyes. For the first time that night, his face softened. "Yes, you are?" Emily Holloway. I sent the invitation. I'm so happy you came." "I thought it might be a mistake." "Not at all. We have a project at school for veterans. I read the letters, stories. Your name was in one of them." "My story?" He was surprised, almost with shame. "A letter of yours to the public library program about the mission in Kandahar." Frank smiled with a nostalgic air. "I thought nobody read those things." She sat beside him, ignoring looks that began to emerge from some guests. A waiter stopped for a moment, as if he were going to ask her to move away, but retreated when he realized who she was. "Was my father rude to you?" she asked in a low voice. "Let's say he's taking care of his party. I don't take it personally." "I do." "Dean," Frank looked at her more attentively, the daughter of a magnate, amid luxury, taking the side of a stranger. "You're different," he murmured. "I like people nobody notices." She smiled sincerely. On the other side of the garden, Richard watched her with a closed expression. He murmured something to a security guard, but didn't intervene. Not yet. Nearby, two guests began to comment. "He's with her now. Did you see? She always had this activist phase. Remember the vegan pet rabbit? But he seems dangerous. Veteran, right? You never know." Emily didn't hear any of this. "Mr. Dawson, what's in that little box?" He hesitated. "A memento. It's not much. Just something I thought you might like." She lightly touched the paper. "Can I open it?" "Of course." She opened it slowly, revealing a small framed medal. Below, an inscription, "For the one who saved my brother when nobody else would." Emily was speechless. "It's from my friend, Calvin. We served together. He was wounded, and I stayed with him until rescue came. His sister sent me this years later." "And why are you giving it to me?" "Because I read your letters, and because you're the first person who asked me who I am." Emily felt her eyes well up. She didn't cry, but took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotion. "You should tell that story to everyone here. Nobody wants to hear it." She stood up, determined. "I want to, and I'll make them want to, too." Frank watched her with surprise. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Not as an ex-soldier, nor as a retiree, but as a human being. Meanwhile, inside the house, Richard was arguing with his wife. "She's exposing herself too much. This will look bad." "Look bad for whom? You? There are investors here, Lorraine, and she's glued to a strange old man who smells like mold." He's a veteran, and your daughter is being more patriotic than you've been your entire life." Richard swallowed hard. That touched a sensitive point, but he wasn't ready to hear truths yet. Emily returned to the bench with her phone in hand. "Mr. Dawson, can I record you talking about Kandahar?" "What for?" "I want to show who the real hero of this party is." Frank hesitated. He looked at the lights around, the empty smiles, the stage decorated with fake American flags. "Only if you promise you won't edit it to look like a supermarket commercial." "I promise." She pressed record. And, in a low voice, Frank began to speak. First about the years in the army, then about the battles, the losses, the letters he wrote to soldiers' mothers, and finally about the silence that came when he returned. A deafening silence that lasted until that night. As he spoke, a small group began to approach, curious people, some out of politeness, others out of guilt, but all with the same reaction upon hearing the story: amazement. And it was there, in that improvised recording under the party lights, that Frank Dawson stopped being the invisible old man of the night. He became, word by word, the man who would change everything. Frank's words, recorded on Emily's phone, began softly. His tone was measured, loaded with memory and an emotion that didn't need to be dramatized. It was there, raw. "You don't come back from war whole, Emily. Not even when your body is intact." He stared at the garden as if seeing another landscape. For him, they weren't golden chairs or silk curtains hanging from gazebos. They were dry dunes, noisy helicopters, the smell of burning oil and gunpowder in the air. Emily, still holding the phone, seemed to absorb each word as if she were hearing the country's own story, retold by someone who lived it from within. "I was 23 when I was sent to Kandahar. It was my second mission. I thought I knew what fear was. I thought I'd come back quickly, get my diploma, work at the city post office, and take care of my mother. But everything changes when you hold the hand of a 19-year-old boy who's dying and begs you not to leave him alone." He paused. Emily turned off the recording out of respect, but kept her attention focused. "I'm not a hero. I just stayed because I couldn't run away." She didn't respond. She just sat beside him again. "And when you came back, what happened?" Frank gave a bitter laugh. "Silence. The town had changed. People call you brave at the supermarket, but they look away if you start crying out of nowhere in the checkout line." "Did you have support? Treatment? From the government?" "I got a postcard with a phone number. I called. They told me to wait. 3 months, then 3 more. Emily looked away for a moment. She didn't know what to say. She had never heard something so harsh told with such simplicity. "And your family?" "My wife couldn't handle it. She said the man who came back wasn't the same one who left, and she was right. My son, well, he distanced himself too." That sentence hung in the air. Emily swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." "Me too." Meanwhile, the small recording she had posted on her stories was already beginning to spread silently among the guests. People in the garden picked up their phones, read the name Frank Dawson, and exchanged glances. One of Richard's business partners commented, "That's the same name as the soldier Congress honored in 2012, remember? The one who held the position alone for 2 hours until rescue came?" "Yes. I thought he had died." Richard heard that and froze for a moment. A trickle of sweat ran down his temple. "No, it can't be him!" Frank, meanwhile, remained steady. "There are nights I still wake up hearing voices, and sometimes no voice at all. That's the worst kind of silence." Emily then did something that surprised even herself. She took the medal he had given her and pinned it to her dress collar. "You shouldn't be sitting here in the corner of the party. You should be on stage. Stage is for those who want applause. I just wanted to deliver this and leave. But this story isn't just yours, Mr. Dawson. It belongs to the whole country." Frank looked at her, his eyes moist, but his expression firm. For the first time in years, someone made him feel that his pain wasn't just weight, it was also testimony. More people began to approach. A high society lady put her hand to her chest upon hearing part of Frank's account. A young executive with a choked voice asked, "Are you that Frank Dawson, from Base Bravo, 2009? Frank just nodded. The silence that once surrounded him was transforming into murmur, respect, curiosity, guilt. Richard watched from a distance, his face pale, his expression lost. There was something about that story that seemed too familiar, too uncomfortable. Emily started recording again. "Mr. Dawson, can I ask one more thing?" "Of course." "If you could talk to that 23-year-old soldier who left, what would you tell him today?" Frank thought for long seconds. "I would tell him to keep fewer medals and hug his wife more often. I'd tell him not to hide the pain, and above all, that it was worth it, even if nobody has said so yet." The silence that followed was dense, but not empty. A group of guests began to applaud, without there being a speech, without a master of ceremonies, just as a response to what they had just heard and felt. That night, among floral arrangements, LED lights, and expensive champagne, an old soldier had achieved something rare: being heard. Richard Holloway watched the scene from the mansion's balcony, his fingers tense around his whiskey glass. The sound of applause honoring Frank echoed like an annoying buzz in his ears. No matter how much he tried to maintain composure, something that night was getting out of his control. And he hated losing control. Lorraine, his wife, appeared beside him with an air that mixed relief and accusation. "You should be down there." "With that old man?" Richard replied with a nervous laugh. "With your daughter. What she's doing is bigger than any contract you've signed this year." Richard looked away, trying to disguise his discomfort. "It's not him. Must be another Frank Dawson. You recognized him the moment he walked in." Richard didn't respond, but his silence said everything. Years ago, before fame, fortune, and luxury apartments in Miami, Richard had been just a young Army logistics officer temporarily assigned to Afghanistan. It was a technical position, far from the front. But one night during an attack, everything changed. He remembered the siren, the panic, the shots cutting through the base like invisible blades, and he also remembered a hand that pulled him behind an improvised barricade, seconds before an explosion. That hand belonged to a soldier he never saw again. He only learned later that the name was Frank Dawson, and he never told that story to anyone. Instead, Richard used his army experience as personal marketing to grow in business. He created an investment fund that exploited patriotic speeches, sold real estate with names like Liberty Towers and Veteran View, and built an image as a patriotic philanthropist that inside was hollow. And now, the real hero of that night was in his garden, and his daughter was responsible for putting him in the spotlight. Downstairs, Emily was posting more excerpts of her conversation with Frank. The story was beginning to explode on local social media. Invited journalists noticed. One of them approached Emily. "Did you know this man is decorated with the Medal of Honor? It's one of the rarest in the country." "He never told me that." "Of course not. Real heroes don't need to brag." The audience around began to change attitude. People who had ignored him before now approached to shake his hand, hear his voice, ask for a photo. A group of teenagers handed him a small flag and asked him to autograph it. Frank, with humility, tried to stay discreet. "I don't like commotion." "Commotion is what my father created. You brought truth." Emily was holding her phone when a notification appeared. Frank Dawson, war hero honored by Congress in 2012, reappears at Millionaire's party in Dallas. The article featured an old photo of him in uniform beside a plaque from the base in Kandahar. Richard saw that and felt the ground slip from under his feet. His public image was about to be confronted by something he had always avoided: unexpressed gratitude, unpaid debt. In the kitchen, he called one of his trusted security guards. "I need to know everything about Frank Dawson." Now. We're already checking, sir, but there's one detail. What? He's listed as missing for a while. After he came back, he was hospitalized with PTSD for 2 years. Nobody spoke to him anymore. And why did he come back now? It seems your daughter found him again through the school program. Richard punched the marble counter. This will destroy my image. Lorraine entered the kitchen without knocking. The image you built on top of another man's silence. Richard stared at her with anger and shame. You don't understand. I do understand. You owed your life to him, and you never had the courage to say it. The past had returned, not in the form of threat, but of truth. And now Richard needed to decide. Would he continue hiding behind figures and appearances, or would he have the courage to face the man who had saved him, and whom he ignored? That July 4th night seemed written to be predictable. Fireworks, rehearsed speeches, selfies with champagne glasses, everything carefully scripted by Richard Holloway to display his prestige and patriotism. But there was a different energy coursing through the illuminated corridors of the mansion now. Frank Dawson, with his jacket soaked in sweat and humility, had become unintentionally the center of the party. As twilight plunged the Dallas sky into orange tones, the garden gained a new light, no longer from artificial spotlights, but from gazes that finally saw what they had previously ignored. The quiet old man was now an impossible presence to avoid. Emily noticed the change. Some of her father's friends, previously arrogant, now approached with an embarrassed smile, as if they needed permission to speak with Frank. It was in this atmosphere of transformation that a scream cut through the air. "My son! Someone help!" Everyone turned suddenly. Near the pool, a small boy had fallen into the water. Nobody saw how. The mother, a woman in high heels and a party dress, threw herself to the edge, not knowing what to do. The father, paralyzed, screamed for help. Panic. Some guests started running toward the scene but hesitated. A security guard tried to remove his jacket but tripped over a chair. The music stopped, and for a few seconds, chaos reigned. That's when Frank acted. He threw his jacket on the ground and ran, the muscles of his old body moving with the precision of someone who had already faced the worst. His feet crossed the lawn as if he were returning to the battlefield. Without thinking twice, he jumped into the water. The pool was illuminated by blue LED lights, which gave a surreal air to the scene. Frank dove deep, grabbing the boy who was struggling and already beginning to sink. Underwater for a few seconds that seemed like hours, he relived memories, not of a pool, but of rescues in war zones, the feeling of racing against time, the weight of a life that depends on you. He emerged, holding the boy against his chest. "Breathe, kid. Breathe with me." At the edge, guests extended their arms. Frank handed the boy to his mother, who was crying compulsively. He's breathing," someone shouted. "He's safe." The garden erupted in applause, but these weren't ordinary applause. It was a type of reverence, as if everyone there knew they had just witnessed something much greater than any speech or fireworks display. Frank, breathless, sat on the pool's edge. His body trembled, but his eyes were calm. Emily arrived with a towel, knelt down, and covered him carefully. "Are you okay?" "Old, wet, but okay." She laughed, relieved. "You saved him. I just did what I could." The crowd began to approach, some still incredulous, others visibly moved. The Canadian couple knelt before him. "You saved our son's life. Please accept anything." Frank raised his hand. "No, raise this boy with kindness and courage. That's all I ask." One of the teenagers watching the scene murmured, "He's the most incredible guy I've ever seen." Another replied, "And nobody knew who he was an hour ago." Emily stood up, faced the guests. "This man was ignored, looked down upon by many here, but he saved a life today, just as he's saved others before. He's the reason we're all here safe and alive." Silence. Richard, standing at the top of the stairs, watched everything. The light of his pride finally seemed to fade before the brightness of truth. Lorraine approached and spoke softly. "You know what you have to do." He didn't respond. He was still fighting against his own ego. Meanwhile, guests' cell phones kept recording the scene. The video of Frank being applauded while wet, sitting, exhausted, was already circulating on social media with phrases like, "The hero nobody wanted to see," "Veteran saves boy at millionaire party." Patriotism isn't worn, it's lived. A group of younger guests began to sing the national anthem softly. Others followed. And for the first time that night, it wasn't out of formality. It was from real emotion. Frank, soaked, began to sing too. Not for the melody, but because it was the only way he found to thank for being there. Alive, useful, heard. The role reversal was complete. At the richest man in the neighborhood's party, the real honoree was someone who had arrived by bus with a hand-wrapped gift, and everyone knew it now. The rescue video had already surpassed the party's barriers. On phones, comments multiplied. It was as if the name Frank Dawson was resurfacing after years forgotten. But for him, this wasn't about fame. It was about a silent relief, as if he were finally being seen completely. Emily, still beside him, received a call from the school principal. "I saw everything. Your video is going viral. Almost 200,000 views in less than an hour." She smiled, but not out of vanity. People need to know who he is. Meanwhile, Richard Holloway paced back and forth in his office on the mansion's second floor. The phone rang incessantly. Partners, journalists, even a local politician wanting to know more about the veteran who had saved the boy. But what really weighed on him wasn't the external repercussion. It was the memory. That night, in the desert, years ago, the ambush, the desperation, and Frank's face, dirty with earth, pulling him behind a low wall and saying, "You don't owe me anything. Just stay alive." But he did owe, and he knew it. Lorraine entered the room without asking permission. "Are you going to keep pretending you don't know him? If I tell the truth, everything changes. And if you don't, you'll carry this forever." Richard stared at her. For the first time in years, he didn't have a ready answer. In the garden, Emily had climbed onto a small structure near the fountain. She took the microphone that would be used for her father's speech. The crowd fell silent upon seeing her there. "Good evening, everyone. I know this party was organized to honor the American spirit, and that many came here to celebrate in style. But today, something real happened here. Something nobody planned." She pointed to Frank, sitting near the stairs, still drying his hair with a towel. "This man saved a life tonight, and he saved many others before that. And it wasn't with speeches or with parties or with expensive toasts. It was with courage, silence, and sacrifice." People looked at each other. Most already knew, but hearing it from the host's daughter was like an official seal. "My father organized this party, but it was Mr. Dawson who made it unforgettable." Frank tried to get up discreetly, but the audience began to applaud him standing, not for spectacle, for merit. Emily continued, "But there's something more, something nobody here knew, not even me, until a few minutes ago." She revealed her phone screen. The most recent article said, "Frank Dawson is identified as the soldier who saved Richard Holloway's life in Afghanistan." A buzz took over the crowd. Everyone turned to the balcony. Richard was there in silence, with a tense face. That truth, kept buried for more than 2 decades, was now public. Frank looked at him. His eyes held no hatred, just deep fatigue. Emily came down from the stage and walked to her father. "You never told anyone about this." Richard took a deep breath. The silence was unbearable. "I was afraid." Afraid of what? Of seeming small before him. He looked at Frank and for the first time in many years walked in the opposite direction of pride. He reached him, knelt slowly, and took the microphone from Emily's hand. I built my career on top of speeches about courage, leadership, and gratitude. But the truth is that I lived much of my life being ungrateful. He looked at Frank. You saved me, and I pretended I didn't know you because it was easier that way. But this night taught me that what's easy is rarely right. Frank nodded slightly. I'm not here for judgment. I just came to deliver a gift to your daughter. Richard smiled almost embarrassedly. And you ended up giving me something that no amount of money can buy. He stood up and turned to the guests. This party won't be remembered for the fireworks or the lobster dishes. It will be remembered for what it really means to be American, and this man represents that much better than I ever have. Applause, some with tears in their eyes, others with visible shame. Frank finally stood up. I didn't come for this, but if it serves any purpose, I'm glad I came. Emily smiled. Lorraine hugged her, and even Richard, with all his rigidity, felt the weight of something dissolving inside him. That night, it was no longer the man with the perfect garden who received applause. It was the man almost nobody wanted to hear, but who had the story everyone needed to listen to. The night progressed, but nobody seemed to want to leave. The party had transformed. What had once been an elitist celebration with synchronized pyrotechnics was now a living portrait of redemption, something rare, sincere, and deeply human. Frank, still with his wet shirt clinging to his body, walked through the garden among guests who now treated him with the kind of reverence reserved for real heroes. There was no flattery, just respect. Extended hands, discreet hugs, emotional gazes. Emily accompanied him, as if she were his granddaughter at heart. Lorraine made sure he was well accommodated, brought him a new coat, and prepared a guest room in case he wanted to spend the night. For the first time, Frank accepted help without guilt. On the main balcony, Richard watched the scene in silence. He drank water, not whiskey. Something inside him had changed. It was as if, finally, he had understood that greatness isn't in bank account numbers, but in gestures nobody sees. He approached slowly, with measured steps, like someone who doesn't want to interrupt a sacred ceremony. Frank, can I talk to you for a moment? Frank turned, without tension, just attentive. Of course. Richard took a deep breath. His voice, different from all other times, sounded sincere. Today I saw my daughter teach me what I spent years trying to forget, and I saw you teach something that no amount of money could ever buy me. Integrity. Frank just listened. I built a life based on marketing, patriot in speech, capitalist in practice. And even after everything you did for me, I stayed quiet, because I thought gratitude would weaken me. I'm not anyone's judge, Richard, but you should be. Both laughed lightly. Richard then turned to the audience and went up to the improvised stage. He took the microphone and looked at those present. Most of you know me as the businessman who talks about patriotism in campaigns and invests in projects with heroes' names. But tonight, the real hero was sitting on a bench, invisible to all of us, until he saved a life. He paused. The silence was total. And for that, I have a request. He extended his hand to Frank. Allow me to honor you the right way. Frank hesitated, but Emily nodded with a look. He went up to the stage under applause. The security guard who had previously treated him with suspicion now helped him up the steps. On stage, Richard handed him an improvised plaque, but with strong words, to Frank Dawson, for courage in silence, for strength in humility, and for being the man we should all aspire to be. The audience applauded standing. Frank took the microphone, looked at the crowd, and said with a firm voice, I don't need plaques, but I'm grateful, because today I was heard, and that's worth more than any medal. The emotion was visible in everyone's eyes. Even the waiters stopped to listen. Frank looked at Emily, and his voice softened. This young woman gave me a voice, not with questions, but with presence. And that is what changes the world. Days later, the video of the rescue and tribute exploded on social media. National newspapers published the story. TV shows invited Frank. He refused them all. He said his stage time had passed, and what mattered now was living in peace. But something changed in that community. The local club created a scholarship with his name. Emily's school launched an oral memory project with forgotten veterans, and the Holloway Mansion, once a symbol of status, became an annual meeting point for real tributes, not parties. Frank became the guest of honor. Richard also changed. He sold one of his ventures to finance psychological support centers for veterans. He stopped using the army as marketing. He began using his voice to listen and not just to be heard. And Emily? She continued writing, recording stories, taking the memory of men like Frank to where silence tried to reign. Frank, for his part, returned home, a simple home on the outskirts of Dallas. But now he no longer carried just memories. He carried something you can't see but can feel, recognition. And every time he looked at the medal on his shelf, he didn't think about the shots, the deserts, or the years of forgetfulness. He thought about the girl who saw what nobody wanted to see, and for that, he smiled. Not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes they wear worn jackets and hold simple gifts in their hands, and they just need one thing to be seen: someone willing to listen.